It is July 2nd and it is hot out. When it gets hot out, our plants grow like crazy, and when it's really hot, some of them want to bolt, which means they go to seed. I have a container of cilantro plants here, and I can see that they've had some really rapid growth in the last few days, and when they start to get frilly on the ends, I know that they're hot and they're ready to bolt. When a plant, especially an herb or a leafy green, starts to bolt, it can change the flavor of the herb or the plant, like lettuce for example, make it a little bit more bitter, and it also tells the plant it's time to die, right? So when a plant goes to seed, it's done its job. It's made its seed, it's spreading, and then it starts to die off. For my herbs, I want to keep them going and alive as long as I can, especially in this super hot weather. So today I'm going to show you how to prune. I'm going to show you one way to prune a cilantro plant. And then I'm going to show you a quick and easy dish that you can use the trimmings in. Now, there are a few ways to prune plants, but if you kind of understand how plants grow and why to prune a plant, you'll realize that they're very much the same from plant to plant. So let me get a little bit closer to this cilantro plant. So a lot of plants that commonly people will grow in their garden or on their patio or even in a windowsill, they grow very much the same way. And if you kind of understand how that works, you can prune really any of them. So if you take a look at this cilantro plant down at the bottom, you can see, let me adjust a little bit. Coming out of the bottom here, we have a main stem. And this stem goes all the way up this plant. Off this main stem, you're going to see shoots of leaves coming off here, okay? Okay, I had to find some good examples. Let's look at this one. Let's look at this nice robust one, okay? So down at the bottom here, we have this main stem. We have a leaf coming off here, and in between the leaf and the stem, we have this other little branch, and that's called a sucker. People tend to think of suckers as something that you need to get rid of. Not necessarily. It depends on what you want the plant to do. Let's keep following this up. Follow the stem up, and we have another leaf here, and in between the leaf and the stem we have a sucker, and we keep going up, and we're going to continue to see that pattern, a leaf and a sucker. So depending on what you want your plant to do, you can leave it alone or you can start to prune it. As this is growing right now, this plant is going to get really tall, and at the top here it will probably flower and bolt. I don't want it to get tall, I want it to get bushy. So let's think about like a tomato plant. Let's say you don't want a big bushy tomato plant, you want a nice tall tomato plant with great big tomatoes on it. You don't want this plant to bush out, you're going to cut off these suckers. We're not doing that today with this cilantro. With this cilantro, what we want to do is we want to trim so that we encourage these suckers to grow, because each of these suckers will become another big bushy plant like this. So it'll have another main stem. So you'll have here another main stem growing out, which will have leaves and suckers. Here you'll have another main stem coming out. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to trim the top of this plant off, and when we do, it's going to encourage these suckers to grow into a bigger plant. For cilantro, all you really need to do this is just your fingers. It's a very tender plant. You can just pinch these off. But for purposes of this video, I'm going to use these pruners because they are so fine tipped, and it'll make it easier for you to sort of see what I'm doing. So I don't want to cut more than, say, a third of this plant. In fact, I should have probably pruned this sooner because if you cut too much off this plant, it kind of puts stress on that plant. And and it's harder to keep it healthy. So I don't want to cut more than about 1/3 of the plant, but I'm going to be brave today, and I'm going to take quite a chunk on here because I can. The plant is going to be fine, and I really want to encourage this growth. So as long as you cut above where, you know, 1 or 2 of these suckers are, you're going to allow that sucker to continue to grow. So if I were to cut this plant here, for example, this sucker would grow. This one obviously would not. I would really love to have both of these suckers grow into a nice robust plant. So I'm going to cut this stem off right above that second sucker. So now what I have is the top of this plant, and I can use this or I can discard it. This is really gonna, you know, you don't have to cut your plants if you're not gonna use them. I shouldn't say that. You should cut your plants whether you're gonna use them or not. So if I wasn't ready to use this, I could just take this little guy, stick it in a glass of water, and it would keep on my counter for several days until I'm ready to use it. Today we're gonna make a dish with it. So I'm just gonna go through this plant, and I'm gonna start pruning a little bit off here and let you sort of watch and see how I do it. This one's a little bit trickier. This stem is really thick and stocky. I think this is going to be the main stem, and this is a sucker that's coming off of it with these leaves here. So, and I'm going to move a little bit faster. I'm just going to pinch with my fingers here. So I'm just going to prune that off right here. Okay, I lied. My fingers aren't really strong enough with... I had surgery on my wrist recently, so it's a little bit hard to pinch. This plant was sitting in the house to keep it a little bit cooler. Now that I brought it outside, it's really getting floppy. One thing you may have trouble with is sometimes it's hard to tell, you know, am I pruning off the top of the plant or am I pruning off a sucker? And one way to kind of recognize where the top of the plant is that the new growth, especially when it's really hot and it might be starting to bolt, gets sort of frilly like this. You can see how these leaves are nice and thick and fleshy, and these leaves are a little bit ferny. You can tell these leaves are the new growth, and then you can just trim those off. Okay, so I feel pretty good about the amount of leaves I took off the top of this plant. I could certainly do more. Another thing that people will also do, and you certainly could do this, is take the whole plant at once. So for example, I could just grab onto this, take my scissors or a knife, and cut the whole thing off, and this baby will grow back a couple of times. So they call that the cut and come again method. It does take more time. If I were to do that with this batch, I would probably have a good period of time that I wouldn't have cilantro fresh and ready to go. So I prefer to just take what I need when I need it. Another thing that is really great to do with cilantro, since it does it has a pretty short lifespan where it's ready to use like this. You know, it takes some time to grow and then boom, it bolts and the plant is done. One way to remedy that is to is to succession plant them. So scatter some cilantro seeds every couple of weeks. I'll be planting some again today in one of my planters. And then another way to do it, make sure that you have a good long season for your cilantro, is to get a slow bolt variety of cilantro. This is not one of those. I am placing an order this week to get some of those so that I can get them planted for my next round. So this is the amount of cilantro that I took off the top of my plants. It is blistering hot out here, and you can see how wilted this got already. I probably should have done this indoors, but let's take this inside because, you know, one of the hardest parts of gardening is understanding, once you have something ready to go, what can I do with it? If you're not a recipe person like me, then this is a perfect video for you, because I don't do recipes. I'm gonna find something in my kitchen to use this in. So here we are in the kitchen. I'm gonna start off my dish with a base of quinoa. So if you've never cooked with quinoa, it's a grain similar to, you know, barley or rice, that sort of thing. I've got two different kinds here today. This is kind of what it looks like. You can get it in the store, in a box, or in a bag like these. I'm gonna make a bigger batch, so I'm going to use up what I have here, and I'm going to show you how to cook it in the Instant Pot. The packages for quinoa, you boil it similar to rice. You know, they say, you know, a cup of quinoa and however much water, and you boil it. One thing about quinoa is I can never cook it on the stovetop without it boiling over and getting everywhere. And quinoa is tiny, so it's these tiny little sticky roly beads. So when they boil over and they get all over the place, they're super hard to clean up. So I'm going to use the Instant Pot. It'll be mess free. One of my cheats in the kitchen is near my Instant Pot, on the inside of this cupboard, I have sticky notes, and they tell me, I'll show you, they tell me a lot of the common recipes that I do. So this cheat sheet here came with my Instant Pot, and so it tells you kind of the cook times for common items you might cook. You know, I cook a lot of rice, and that's up here. Black beans is here, and my quinoa recipe is right here. So I'll be watching that as we move along here and make sure that I'm not forgetting anything. So let's see. The first thing I'm going to do is just measure out some of the quinoa. My recipe calls for 1 cup of quinoa, but I'm going to make some extra and freeze it. So I'm going to do 2 cups of the dried quinoa. I was a little bit nervous I wasn't going to get that open. My hands are a little sore yet. This is red quinoa. The other one was rainbow quinoa. I kind of like the mixture because I feel like the texture between the two is a little bit different. I like it a little bit grainier and crunchier. But the flavor, I mean, the flavor isn't a lot different. And besides, when you cook with quinoa, it's really about what you put in it, the seasonings, and or, you know, a salad dressing or something. So I'm going to teach you this method. It's not necessarily what I do, but you're supposed to rinse quinoa. There's an outer layer on it that can make it a little bit bitter tasting. I personally haven't noticed the difference, but I want to give you the best advice, so I'm going to rinse this off in the sink. You can see a little bit of that foam coming off of there, and this is just cold water, cold tap water. Okay. Now, if I were smart, I would have some cooking spray handy. I don't, so I'm gonna skip that and just hope for the best. But when you're cooking in the Instant Pot, when you have things that can foam up like rice or like quinoa, you do want to add a little bit of oil, because when you release the pressure of that, it could sputter and kind of spit out the top. And if you got a little bit of oil in there, it'll help keep that foam down. So I'm going to add a little bit of oil to this as well. Okay, so my recipe calls for 1 cup of quinoa and per half a cup of water. I used 2 cups of quinoa because I want a little bit bigger batch, so I'm just going to go ahead and put 1 cup of water in there. Now this is probably less than the amount of water that the package will call for, and that's because when you cook it on the stove, you do have some evaporation and you lose some of that water. In the Instant Pot, you don't lose quite as much, so we account for that too. We don't want it to get mushy in here. Okay, so I've got my 1 cup of water, a pinch of salt per cup. I just have a shaker, so I'm just going to put a little salt in there. And then I'm going to put just a dribble of oil, maybe a tablespoon. And this is just regular olive oil. All right. So I'm going to grab my Instant Pot lid. I'm putting that on, and then this locks it in tight. And then for quinoa, we're going to just pressure cook it on high for just 1 minute. Oops. High for 1 minute. This will start up on its own. Now, it's going to take some time, maybe 5-10 minutes tops, to get up to pressure. Once it's up to pressure, then the timer will start counting down 1 minute. And then after that, after the timer goes off, we want to let this naturally release pressure for another 10 minutes. So in total, we could be looking at up to 20 minutes to make this. But I promise you, it's easier than cooking on the stove because I get to walk away from this, and when I come back, it's going to be done, and it's going to be done perfectly. I forgot, while this cooks up, I'm just going to run around and I'm going to look for some things to put in this salad. That's the way I cook, and I recommend that sort of point of view for every gardener out there, because you don't always have exactly what you want when you want it. And so learning to cook and make use of what you have when it's in season and it's ready for you is a really great skill to have. So I'm just going to look around, I'm going to run out to the garden, I'm going to check the fridge and the cupboards and see what I have to make this an awesome salad. Alright guys, I'm excited. Check this out. I found a lot of stuff. It might be pretty bulky. Here we go. So, I haven't found so many things. Alright, so to start with, of course, we have the cilantro that we picked today. Now, you don't need all of this stuff. This is just stuff I happen to have on hand. I'm going to throw in this salad. This is just some chives I had ready to go on my deck, in my garden and my deck. I have a ton of basil that needed to be pruned, so I pulled some of that out too. I don't know how it's going to taste in this salad because I haven't tried basil with this before, but I love basil with everything, so it's going to be great. I had a can of black olives. I've got some tomatoes. Unfortunately, these are not my homegrown tomatoes. Mine are not ready yet. The dressing I'm going to go with is just a balsamic vinaigrette. I have a little pre-made just balsamic vinaigrette salad dressing here. It's just a little bit. You could also just make your own with some olive oil and some balsamic vinegar. If I need it, I might put in a splash of red wine, but I'm just going to start with this and taste it and add as I go. I also have this little tub of, this isn't what I wanted. This is what I wanted. I could put feta cheese in here, but I really like this with goat cheese. This is a really soft cheese, so you want to make sure to put it in at the very end because it will kind of get mushy, so it's a good topping. I had some of this curly kale ready to go in my garden, so I'm going to chop that up and put in there. I happen to have just this one package of dried cranberries, craisins in my cupboard. Why not use them up in my salad? And a little bit of sliced almonds just laying there in the cupboard waiting to be used. I went out to pick some kale, and my neighbor offered up a handful of her fresh raspberries to go in my salad. And then this is a cucumber that got away from me, so I picked that, and now we're gonna put this in the salad. And then I didn't have any fresh beets yet this year, and so these were just freezer packed with my food saver, and I've had them in the freezer since last year, and I love beets in my quinoa salad, and so those are going to go in there too. So I've got 1 minute until the quinoa is finished, and then I'm going to also start chopping up some of these goodies to put in that salad. I have recruited my husband to help me do some of the chopping here because I made an attempt at doing so, and boy did that smart. So he's going to help me out with that. In the meantime, this is done. It's actually 4 minutes over. I had a little bit of a distraction. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit the button on top here to make sure that the steam is completely released. It is, and I can tell that because the little pin on the top has dropped. I'm just going to open this guy up. And on the Instant Pot, you can just prop that lid up on the side. And then I'm going to make sure to shut this off because that will automatically set itself on a keep warm setting. And I'm going to go ahead and just fluff this all up with a spoon. And I want this to cool off completely before I start mixing it in my salad because I'm going to have some cheese on there. I don't want to melt, and also I don't want my lettuce, my kale to get to start getting mushy. So this is going to cool completely. I'll probably put it in the fridge to speed that along. Alright, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Maggie, this sucks. All I wanted was a simple recipe to use my cilantro in, and you brought out 1,000 ingredients, and I don't know how much to put in, or I don't have all that stuff. But here's the magic of cooking. The magic is, all of these are choices. They're not things that you have to put in here. They're choices of all the things that you want to use. I'm using quinoa as my base. You don't need quinoa. You could make a lettuce salad, put some cilantro on it. But I'm making quinoa, and all of these are choices that I can put in. If I want something lighter, I can grab a can of corn, and I can throw that in there with some balsamic vinaigrette, maybe some black olives and some beets, and have a really light, fresh summer salad. I could make it really simple. Put some cilantro in this quinoa or in some rice, right? Cilantro lime rice and a little squirt of lime, and you've got a great dish there. These are options for you. So you can, and what I will do is keep some of these separate because this will make several salads for me. So I've taken a portion of the quinoa, and I'm just going to choose what I put in there. Ultimately, I'll probably put most of it because I have it, but you don't have to. So if I were to just start with this quinoa and say, well, I've got this vinaigrette on hand, let me start with that. Okay, so I've got a little balsamic in here. I don't measure everything because I'm gonna add more or less to taste anyways. And I'm gonna say, you know, I've got my cilantro here, and let's say that's the only spice I have. That's the only herb I have. I'm gonna put my cilantro in here, and maybe I know I have a little bit of kale. Maybe you don't have kale, leave it out. But I know that that's gonna really lighten up the salad and make it pop. if that's all I had, this would be amazing. Just this simple little salad. Really good. But I have more than that. So I really like having beets in my salad. So I'm going to put a few of these. Okay. Most of you have beets in your cupboard. And I also really love corn in everything. So I'm just going to take a little can of corn and stir this up in here. Maybe a little more. Actually, I'm not going to add more, but I'm going to show this to you because when you look at this salad, you can see that's delicious, okay? What I also see in here is that it's a lot of quinoa in proportion to the other things I have in here. So if these are the only ingredients I had, I could just add more kale or I could just add more corn, but I have other things. I have this cucumber that I needed to use. I needed to get it out of the garden, and I'm going to throw this in there. And I've got the tomato, so I'm going to throw that in there too. These are all things I have on hand. These are all things I love to eat, but they don't all have to go into the salad. So if you're wondering, you know, I'm a gardener, I'm a new gardener maybe, but I don't know how to eat kale. You don't have to just eat kale. You don't need a fried kale recipe or a kale hot dish recipe. This is how you eat your garden foods. You mix it in with your regular meals that you eat every day. And that's, you know, how gardeners enjoy their bounty. You don't have to have a beet recipe, you know, or you got a raspberry bush, but you don't know how to make raspberry jam or don't have enough for raspberry jam. That's okay, because you just mix it in with the stuff that you already have on hand. So I'm going to finish this up. The rest of the quinoa I'm going to package in Ziploc bags. And if you package them nice and tightly, put them nice and flat, you can put them in your freezer and just thaw out for the next salad that you wanna eat. These ingredients will go in the fridge in separate containers, and throughout the week for my lunches, I will just pull some of them out and mix up salads like this and eat them. If I wanted to, I could do it all at once. I also would say that with quinoa and any of these cold salads, for me, they tend to get a little on the bland side the longer that they sit in the fridge. I don't know if it's just that the quinoa absorbs the flavor, and then I end up adding more, you know, dressing to it. So it's nice to have everything kind of separated out and just make them as you need. So this will actually be a couple meals for me or a meal for myself and my husband. I can put this in the fridge as is. When I top it off, I'm going to put some crumbled goat cheese. If you haven't tried goat cheese in a cold salad, do it. You must. It sounded absolutely disgusting when I tried it for the first time, but I'm addicted. And I'll probably put some sliced almonds on there for a little crunch. So that's it. I hope that helped you sort of understand a really great way to start using some of the things that you're growing in the garden. Don't stress too much about, you know, what you're going to do with your abundance, because there are things other than canning and pickling that you can do with your garden produce. My next video, I'm going to answer some questions for new gardeners on potting and caring for a tomato plant. We'll see you next time.